Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to go over the comprehension assignment for this week and your summary and analysis paragraph 2 assignment. So let's take a look at, this and assignments. So first of all, I want to start with the comprehension assignment. I'm not doing a quiz this week, is the big news. So I wanted to mix it up a little bit and give you a short assignment that involves just applying some of the concepts of the chapter to the poems that are in the chapter. So this, is to encourage you to do a little bit of close reading of the poems. What I want here is that, for each of these three poems for the reading, so you have Singapore, these are the poems right here, Singapore, Blackberries, and the Mill. All right, so I want you to find an example of figurative language in each of these poems. Okay, but they have to be different types of figurative language. So like if you find, say, a metaphor in Singapore, then you can't also find a metaphor in Blackberries. It needs to be another type of figurative language. Okay, so that's what I mean, when I say essentially you need to find examples of three different types of figurative language. And I have the figurative language handout here that I put together that basically covers the essential types of figurative language that you're looking for. All right. So it could be, metaphor, simile, personification. So, and I group them based on what the figurative language is doing. All right. To, hopefully help you, keep these concepts separate, because it's, I find a lot of times people confuse metaphor and symbolism, and it's all mixed up. So with metaphor, simile, and personification, we're making a comparison, right? So the figurative language is making a comparison between unlike things. Synecdoche and metonymy, which you may be less familiar with, but you and encounter it all the time. This is substitution. You're substituting one name or word for another. So if you call your car your wheels, or even if you just say the U.S. won the gold medal instead of the U.S. Olympic team, like that's using part of something to refer to the whole, or vice versa. That's called synecdoche. When you refer to when you hear the president referred to as the White House, like the White House released a statement. Obviously, we're talking about the people who are, who are associated with the White House. The house itself is just a house. So this is called metonymy, referring to the film industry as Hollywood, right? You're not actually talking about the city limits of Hollywood. You're talking about the film industry. So, so when we use that kind of substitution, we're substituting a name for, either the part of something or place or thing that's associated with it. So with these two, this is really about naming things, okay, and substitution. Symbolism is about representation. So here, an image or object represents an idea. So the difference between representation and, say, comparison, unlike things like comparing a runner to a cheetah, so these are two things that exist. We would not ordinarily compare them, but in this one, in this context, similarity between them that we're using with our figurative language. But with symbolism, we're starting with an image and object, and we're saying that image and object represents an idea. That, in other words, there's an idea that is associated with this image and object that, has this sort of deeper significance to the text. So like a rose might represent romantic love. So if you give, on Valentine's Day, if you, give your significant other a rose, like you're not saying, here, plant me a garden. You're saying that this rose represents my love for you, my affection for you. So it's not necessarily comparing the rose to love, right? I mean, you could, if you wanted to write a poem comparing a rose to love, But that's not what we're doing with symbolism. We're not saying that a love is like a rose, though some have said that. We're saying that this rose, I'm giving you this rose as a token to represent that idea. And then the last type of figurative language is irony. So this is a discrepancy in meaning, intention, or expectation. And the word discrepancy, you think of it as a sort of a difference or an inconsistency, or even a distance between, what something means, or how we expect, the kind of expectations we have for something, and the reality of, or the context of the situation. So, the easiest way to explain it is to just break it down into the three types, and you probably have some familiarity with irony. You definitely, have encountered and used irony before. Literal irony is basically sarcasm. The actual meaning is the opposite of the literal meaning. All right. So if you say, "I'm so excited for this tornado drill," or that 2-hour lecture was a real blast, you're being sarcastic. So, the meaning is expressed through the context and the tone, not through the literal meanings of the words, right? So, if somebody took your statement literally, then they would assume that you mean the opposite of what you actually mean, right? And so that's the discrepancy, the difference, the inconsistency. There's a distance between, like what you're literally saying and what you actually mean. And in order to understand your actual meaning, we have to consider the context. Situational irony is when what happens is the opposite of what a definition suggests should happen. All right. So here we're dealing with our expectations, right? But it's always our expectations based on, sort of based on meaning, based on language, based on how we've defined and named things. So the fire station burning down is ironic because it's part of the definition of what it means to be a fire station is that it protects, other buildings from burning down, right? So, so it's not necessarily ironic, just because, you wanted something to happen and it didn't happen, I don't want my house to burn down. And it would suck if my house did burn down, but it wouldn't be ironic for my house to burn down, right? Because there's nothing inherent in my house and in how my house is sort of defined to prevent us from expecting it to burn down. Okay. Now it would be ironic if if I installed some kind of like fire alarm system in my house, and that fire alarm system short-circuited, and that's what caused my house to burn down, right? That would be ironic. Just as, it's not really ironic if it rains on your wedding day, just because you don't want it to rain and you have an idea of what your wedding day should look like. That wouldn't be ironic, but, if you chose a certain day or a certain place because you were convinced that because let's say you chose to have your wedding in a certain place where it never rains just to avoid rain, and then it turned out that one day was the one day it rained in that place, and then maybe it didn't rain somewhere else, then now we're kind of getting into irony, right? Because the reason you chose a location is to avoid the rain, but it rained anyway. So, so there be, levels of irony, but it always needs to be connected to, like I said, sort of the meanings of words or the intention of our behavior. So if we if we intend to do something but end up causing the exact opposite to happen, then yes, that's ironic. And then the last one, dramatic irony. So this is when the audience knows something in the story that a character in the story does not know. All right. And this is, it's typically how horror movies work, is that, you know, you're watching the movie and you know that this is a horror story, but the characters may not know it's a horror story. So, so when when the babysitter goes upstairs to check on the children, that there's probably going to be a killer in the house, or the house is haunted, or whatever kind of horror movie it's going to be. So that the character doesn't. That's where the tension comes from, because you know that this person is walking into danger, but the character does not realize that. So that's dramatic irony. So again, with this assignment, what is, you're choosing poem, an example of figurative language, but it needs to be a different one for each poem, a different type, right? So like you could, to go back to, so maybe for one poem you choose a metaphor, for another poem you choose personification, that's fine. They don't have to be in different categories. Maybe the other poem you find an example of metonymy, or symbolism, or irony. Okay, I just don't want 3 metaphors or 3 examples of symbolism. It needs to be a different type for each poem. So, what you're doing, this isn't intended to be a really long assignment. What you're going to do first is identify, the example I chose is from a play, so Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. So you would give the title of the poem, followed by the quotation, okay, that contains the figurative language, okay, with a citation, an in-text citation, and then underneath it you would explain the figurative language. All right. So when you're explaining it, don't just repeat the definition of the figurative language. You need to explain it in a way that makes it clear that you understand how that definition applies to this quotation. So in other words, don't just say this is an example of personification because something inhuman is described as if it had human traits. No, explain how that idea applies here. So like in this example, personification, the feeling of love is described as a human with both eyes and a mind. Okay, as if this human had its own will and preferences. So you see the difference. So this is, sort of explaining how that definition applies to this quotation. So in your explanation, you should include details from the quotation to make it clear that you understand the definition. All right, and then you should just explain how this ties into the work as a whole. So, in this case, Helena bemoans the fact that Demetrius prefers Hermia. Helena addresses the theme that love renders us irrational. Right. So the idea is just 2 to 3 sentences for each quotation. So there should be 3 total examples. So you'll have 1, 2, 3. You don't need to do a works cited entry for this, because technically you would have to do 3 works cited entries. But I do want the in-text citation. So for the in-text citation, when you're citing poetry, you want to use last names and line numbers. So if the last name is Eliot, you do Eliot, comma, lines, and then 19 to 20, whatever the line numbers are. So a few things that are different from the ordinary parenthetical citation. You need to make sure you specify that it's lines, okay, and you separate the name from that word lines with a comma, okay. If you're citing with page numbers, you don't actually put pages, right? So you also don't have the comma, all right. So you want to make sure you got line numbers, and then you're doing that citation correctly. So submit this as a Microsoft Word document with an MLA heading. But again, I don't need a works cited page for this one. So essentially, I do want it to be double spaced, but essentially, it's, this times 3 is what I'm looking for in terms of the content. So it's not a really long assignment. I don't want full paragraphs in your explanation, just 2 to 3 sentences. Okay. Also, when you're quoting poetry, you want to separate the lines with a forward slash. Okay, just like I do in the example here. All right. So that is the comprehension assignment. So, so that needs to be done by 11:59 p.m. Sunday. The summary and analysis paragraph assignment, let's do it at the same time. So for this one, first of all, make sure that you are that you're reading my comments for the previous summary and analysis paragraph before you attempt this one. You want to make sure that you're doing that. Any mistakes that you made in the previous one, you're not making the same mistake here. Okay, and that might include things with MLA format. A couple of common mistakes that I saw. One, I only want one quotation in this paragraph. All right, so in the first one, some people had 2, 3 quotations that they put in. I just want one quotation, so only one quotation. The quotation should not be more than 40 words long. Okay, it needs to be under 40 words. Everything else should be your summary and your analysis. All right. It should all be one paragraph, though. I had a few where people had a paragraph of summary followed by a paragraph of analysis. I want this to be all one paragraph. All right. Even if your paragraph is, the paragraph should be no more than 300 words. So even if it's at about 300 words, that's a long paragraph. I still just want it to be one paragraph for this. So one paragraph, and then the other thing is that your analysis needs to be analysis of the quotation. All right. So in the last one, I had a number of you gave a quotation from Barno, but then your analysis didn't even discuss the quotation. Your analysis went into why the article in general was persuasive. But you made points that weren't really relevant to the quotation you've chosen. So the idea here is that you're choosing a quotation and you're presenting that quotation for analysis, right? So that you're saying this quotation represents something that I want to explore and explain and analyze about the text as a whole. So, in a sense, you're putting that quotation under the microscope in your paragraph. And then, your analysis is essentially your explanation to us of why you chose this quotation. What does this quotation show us about the work as a whole? How does it help us better understand, the text? All right, and in doing so, you should be focusing on specific words, phrases, details in the quotation and explaining their significance. All right. So for this one, the difference between this assignment and summary and analysis paragraph 1, the main difference is that we're writing about a story, a fiction story, as opposed to argumentative essay. So so the way you approach it is a little bit different. But if you follow the steps that I presented here, then it should be. I've tried to make it fairly straightforward. Begin your paragraph with an overview of Welty's story. Just generally, what is the story about, and then specific context for the quotation you have chosen, right? So, what is happening generally in the story, and then what is happening at the exact moment that you have chosen to quote. That's what you want here. You're looking at about, like 3 to 5 sentences, okay, of that summary. Then you're introducing the quotation into a sentence with either a colon, comma, or a colon, or integrate the quotation grammatically. the and this is, if you're introducing it with a complete sentence and a colon, that complete sentence is considered part of your summary. And that's how I would how I would recommend, especially if you're not really comfortable with introducing and integrating quotations, just do it consistent with how we've been doing it with the discussion question. Complete statement followed by a colon before that quotation. Quotation should not be more than 40 words long. And then, make sure you end the quotation with a clear, complete citation. So name and page number. So Welty and page number. So this is, because this is a story, not a poem, here we are doing the page numbers. All right. Paraphrase what the quotation literally means. So after the quotation, you always sort of explain, okay, well, this is the quotation in my own words. So how would you explain it to somebody who didn't understand the quotation? And then use that to transition into your analysis. So here, just like with the last one, I want you to use at least two concepts from chapter 6 to discuss what this quotation revealed about the characters or themes of the story. All right. And when I say two concepts, what I mean here is, two of the concepts that they focus on and explain in detail, right? So, so like, for example, imagery, language, dialogue, symbol, theme, the style, okay? Short story does not count as one of the concepts. Like, so if you say this quotation comes from a short story, and you come to me and you say, oh, but that's a concept from the chapter. No, that's a lot more general than what I'm thinking of. So just because it's a word in the chapter or the general topic, what I'm looking for are these, more specific concepts that they give you as tools for analysis. All right. Point of view, like that's something that would be a concept that you could use. All right, and again, with what you're doing, focus on specific words or details from the quotations and discuss their significance to our understanding of the story as literature. In other words, as a work worthy of interpretation and discussion. All right, so we're not necessarily, we're not dealing with the persuasiveness piece like we did with summary and analysis, paragraph 1. What you're doing is basically just giving a close reading of the quotation, right? And I don't necessarily mean by this that I want you to explain why this story is literature because of this quotation. What I'm saying is that, you're choosing a quotation that you feel is worthy of interpretation, all right? And this is a primary characteristic of what makes the story literature, is that this is a story that that invites us to go to dig deeper and interpret and discuss what is happening. So so your quotation is basically, you're saying, okay, this is a quotation that deserves that interpretation, that deserves that analysis, that deserves more discussion. And so your analysis should just explain why. Your analysis should give us, again, an explanation of why you chose this quotation. And what you think it reveals about the characters or themes of the story. Okay. Make sure, again, that you're doing your MLA citations. Make sure you have the cited entry for the source at the end. I only want you to cite Eudora Welty's story. Okay. So I don't want you to cite the editor separately, or use a quotation to explain what point of view is. It should be clear from how you use the concepts that you understand them. You don't need to define them for us. I don't want you to use any other sources. I don't want you to research historical context, or the author's biography, and include that. That's not the point. And then, formatting a submission, I'm not going to go over all of these because they're the same as before. Make sure you're using literary present tense. Use present tense to discuss the events in the story and how Welty writes it. So Welty describes the building that Marion enters. All right. Avoid contractions. Avoid words, like it, especially at the beginning of the sentence, or as the subject of your verb. Basically, you don't want to overuse it. It's really easy to just say it without making it clear to yourself or your reader what you're actually even talking about. Yeah, so, and with the citations, don't go more than two sentences in your summary without a citation. Okay. And so just mentioning Welty's name in sort of the first sentence counts as a citation. So then if your summary goes on for more than 3 sentences, then you should probably include another in-text parenthetical citation with Welty's name and a page number for sort of a specific detail that you mentioned. And with short stories, because this is fiction, you can say at the beginning, first sentence, make it clear that Eudora Welty wrote the story. But from there on out, a lot of your citations are going to be in parentheses, right, for Welty, unless you're pointing out, say, like, something specific that Welty is doing, like Welty, uses figurative language to describe, or uses a metaphor to describe, the old woman. And then you would use her name in the sentence. Okay. I have links here, for formatting quotations. Okay. And that gives you really good examples for, when are you supposed to use a colon? Okay. When do you use a comma and not a colon? When do you quote without maybe any punctuation, right? So this would be an example of integrating the quotation. So, if you're, so review that resource, especially if you're, if you're having trouble with the discussion question assignments about when, about using colons, or if you want to try and, you don't want to introduce it with a colon, but, you feel like this should be introduced with a comma, you want to make sure you're doing that correctly too. Okay. But both those links are in the assignment instructions for you. Okay. So that's all I have for this video. Again, the assignment is, both these assignments are due Sunday the 21st by 11:59 p.m. All right, and they need to be submitted to Blackboard, and they can both be found in the assignments folder in Blackboard. All right, thank you.